Hi, this is David Gornoski, host of A Neighbor's Choice and Things Hidden podcast, as well as some of our other programs like Science and You with our chief science advisor, Dr. Yu, and our seed oil survival series that we continue to have great fun unpacking the truth of nutrition. I wanted to give you a quick little message saying we appreciate all the support that we get from our uh, monthly contributors and our one-time donation supporters. And we'd encourage all of you to go to our website, a neighborschoice.com, click on contribute, and make a monthly pledge today, whether it's $1, $5, 15, 20, 50, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Just be a part of building this new media project that we've developed to empower and inform, to inspire, to kickstart a scientific renaissance, an anthropological breakthrough and reformation in the church. All these things are possible with your support right now. So make that commitment today and help us keep doing the productions that we have. Thank you. We're back for another Things Hidden podcast. I'm your host, David Gornoski, joined today by Surit Dasgupta, who is a writer and editor at a neighborschoice.com, where you can see his articles assessing the temerity of the Barbie movie and other great pictures. How you doing, Surit?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
Doing well. And I don't think you reviewed Barbie. I'm just teasing, but you do review other films. What's your favorite film that you've seen this year? It doesn't have to be made this year, but it had to be something you saw this year. And you can't say Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles because we just talked about that last week, even if that is your favorite you've seen.
I haven't watched any movie from 2023, but I have watched one from that came out on Netflix last year called All Quiet on the Western Front. I think it's a very moving film, anti-war German movie, which is I highly recommend it. It's probably a great example of how the gospel technology, as you call it, works through the movie medium. So yeah, that's a great movie. Definitely.
What was a scene that you can share that kind of reveals the gospel technology? And what we mean by gospel technology is that it is a piece of technology, media technology, in this case, film, in this case, cinema, in this case, I guess a historical nonfiction film, right? Or is it a fiction film completely? But
Yeah,
historical
it's a
fiction.
semi fictional film because the author, Eric Maria Remarque, who was a German soldier who served in First World War, wrote it from the perspective of the German soldier who were serving in the trenches in the First World War.
Mhm.
So the experience were quite realistic. You know, nothing glorified at all, nothing fictionalized. Only the characters, I would say, are fiction in the sense that they yeah, it's like it's written in a novelized format. That's what I would say, but it's very real. It's more real than some of the modern war stories that we read about, today.
Right. But what's a scene
uh,
that kind of encapsulates the gospel technology giving a voice to the marginalized, forgotten victim of that conflict?
Oh yes, definitely. There's one scene in that movie, and that scene is common in all prior adaptations of the movie, including the 1930 American adaptation of that novel. So it's a very infamous scene in the novel. It's a scene of this the protagonist, this German soldier. He has to seek cover from artillery inside this foxhole, this so or is it a crater? I don't quite remember, but it's a hole. And the thing is, a French soldier also falls into that hole. And in the moment of panic, he stabs the French soldier over and over again. But when we see all kinds of movies, that's very common thing in action movies especially, is that when a person shoots another man, the man just drops dead with a hole in his chest, right? But in this scene, it's so realistic. It doesn't show that this French soldier who has received multiple stabs on his chest, he is choking, he is gurgling, the blood is spilling out of his mouth, and he's in the process of dying, but he's really struggling, and the German protagonist, the German soldier, he just can't bear it anymore. He covers his ears. He's like hoping that that soldier dies, in battle, but he's not really dying. And in the last, seconds of that French soldier's life, that German soldier, against all of his uh, instincts, as a soldier, he does not try to kill that French soldier anymore. He tries to save that soldier's life and saying, sorry, please forgive me, because his mind is basically short circuited by the raw, brutality, like uh, the image of a human dying in front of him. And he calls that soldier his enemy. He calls him comrade. And it's like basically one human realizing that the other is not an enemy to be killed, but a brother in humanity, made in the image of God. So I think that's a very striking example. That scene, like I said, it has a lot of scenes like that in the movie, and it shows just how the gospel technology works through medium, because we could not have imagined such a scene in any other pieces of ancient literature, or anything that was prior to Christ, or close to Christ. But in such a society that we are in right now, so saturated with the gospel message, become it has become common for war narratives, war stories to you know display this kind of tragedy, that is the violence in war, and how we can redeem ourselves through realizing that tragedy.
Sacrifice is the engine that creates and generates culture. And the only way you can understand how to get out of that culture making matrix is to have someone who can totally see without any of its sacrificial logic affecting their mindset, come into the situation and reveal it without fighting against it. That's what Jesus did in the Passion when he went to the cross and laid bare the way in which the powers and principalities of the world, which is where we generate culture and language and society and government and law, philosophy, all of those things come from this sacrificial generation of meaning, of order, of structure, that one must die for the many. When God enters into the story and brings Jesus into the picture, Jesus has the genius to step into that entire process and expose it by having people accurately report on what happened to him with clear-headed thinking. These folks put down what we call the Gospels themselves, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, as well as other texts in the New Testament that are inspired by what they saw. What did they see? They saw the innocence of a human being being trotted out in front of everybody and accused of everything, accused of envy. And they saw what they realized to be not the will of the gods, but rather the rage of the crowd pouring out onto Jesus. And then him never fighting back, never saying, I'll get you back. You just wait. You just wait till I come back and then I'll get you. He didn't do any of that. And so because of that, we now see cultures that are fully infected with the imagination and the revelation of what was possible in that story is implanted into everything we see today. Because cultures that are deeply steeping, you can think of it like tea, putting herbs into a cup and you're steeping the gospel infection or the gospel herbs or leaves, tea leaves, into your water, your cup of water, which is your culture. Everything looks like the gospel in terms of a gospel haunted society. So that when we see a war or something like that, we can in real time be able to deconstruct and challenge the meaning generated from sacrificing some. We can deconstruct the mythic veneer that this was inevitable, this was just, this was good, this is right. That's why in real time right now, you have powers clashing in the world stage. With the Ukraine war, they're spending billions of dollars, and they're trying to say there's not one good reason to say any sympathetic thought to the ethnic Russians in the eastern part of Ukraine or the Russians in Russia who are in that war. There's not a single thing they ever have to have any justification for their side. So in this case, we are told to pick one side of a mimetic rivalry. Two people fighting, they become undifferentiated the more they fight. And we are told to artificially tune out our gospel-infected conscience to the fact that there's always two sides to a story, especially when you have mimetic rivalry at play, and that you can always see how there's guilt and there's blame and there's good intentions mixed in every camp. But you're not allowed to think like that when the powers of the world are trying to push against gospel technology, seeing the humanity of every person, even those we are told to be at war against, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's why, I would say that the gospel technology is so powerful in bridging gaps within humanity, across nationalities and across races and whatnot. It's like this this book that came out uh, during the time of the American Civil War called Uncle Tom's Cabin. That's another piece of like a lot of people say it's propaganda or whatever, but it's still like it's using a certain kind of narrative that is humanizing, you know, s- someone who is perceived as, being enslaved, or someone who is being, or someone who is being perceived as being subhuman or whatever. So these kind of technologies, these kind of narratives is what is the gospel technology. And it is found throughout cultures that are gospel saturated, like you said. And I would also add, like, as we move further and further in history, these kind of narratives have become the norm, right? It's no longer isolated. Even those that are quote unquote woke or progressive, they have to abide by these new narratives, because they cannot just come out and say that the straight white man is inferior, or like that. They have to make a kind of plea for the marginalized, for the victim, right? And that's how the propaganda, or whatever, is so effective. So we often talk about, oh, this is subversive, oh, this is propaganda, and so on and so on, but we often fail to ask ourselves the question of, okay, if this is propaganda, we have to think about what's making these stories, these propaganda, quote unquote, so effective, right? So that's, I think, the most important question. And I think you have done, you have the explained it so well, making what why these propagandas are so. so effective.
It is it's harder for people to see the victims in a ongoing mimetic rivalry. When you have mimetic rivalry, let's say you have two folks who are very aggrieved against one another and they're shooting up the place back at each other, littering the place with bullets back and forth. There's a lot of casualties that happen. A lot of people get shot in the process. That's a war, or that's a some kind of violent act going on in society. That is where we're headed right now. It's that kind of mindset. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The reason why, here's what I'm trying to get at here. The reason why it's easy for Netflix, to produce films about World War One is because it's not a hot mimetic rivalry that's in flux right now.
Oh yes, yes.
Cooled off. The embers of war and passionate, violent hate has cooled off to some degree. So the embers are warm. You can touch the fire and you can make art through that fire, so to speak. You can show the human condition. But Netflix would never make a movie in which a Russian soldier is humanized right
Oh,
now,
it does
right? They
quite
would
the
never make a
opposite.
fiction movie in which they try to humanize, because Netflix is funded by the oligarchic machines that have financial interest in, BlackRock's got a hand in almost everything. I'm sure they've got a piece of Netflix's tail, and so there's just so much inertia involved in mimetic rivalry when it's happening in real time that one can't stop and pause and consider the humanity when the hot embers of mimetic rivalry are alive and well. The flames are going. It's only after the fact that the gospel technology is able to work more effectively. It's like putting on glasses. Gospel technology allows you to see things that you can't see, like that movie,
They live.
They Live, where you put on the glasses, you can see the secret messages of the world. But unfortunately, people still have to have some kind of willpower involved with processing the messages. And when they're in the middle of a hot mimetic rivalry, it's much, much harder for you to assess with those gospel technology glasses on the hidden victims that you're discounting as it's happening.
But don't you think even that has like uh as we have social media nowadays, and as the war in Ukraine goes on, there's plenty of clips and videos emerging. Like I could say like maybe this is shared by many others as well. Like this war in Ukraine is probably the first ever war that's happening under the light of social media, and as a result, we're getting so many images of so many videos of like the video of those Ukrainian soldiers kneecapping the Russian prisoners of war, and that the mainstream media were trying to pretend like that video did not exist. But plenty of people on Twitter and everywhere else, they can clearly see that video, and they can clearly see that soldiers are violating the Geneva Convention, or committing a war crime there. And as a result, people who initially might have had the initially might have had the belief that these were noble soldiers fighting off invaders are now looking at it like okay, this is not quite black and white as we often
But
make it
still,
out to be.
there's this fundamentalist base of liberal voters that they don't watch those clips, and
Or
they
they might
see,
be pleased by seeing that.
yeah, and they just keep taking the dumbest option on every scandal that we engage with, and I don't understand. You'd think, I remember the general generic liberal voter in 2004 was getting things right. Let's not forget 2004, 2006, 2008, 2011, still somewhat. I mean, the general Democrat voter was still getting things right. Like, we shouldn't have a Patriot Act. We shouldn't have indefinite detention. We shouldn't have state sponsored torture, rendition sites. We shouldn't have Guantanamo Bay putting in people and torturing people without trial who don't even have any conviction. We shouldn't have wars in perpetuity. We shouldn't have crony capitalism. Those were things that the average liberal used to articulate and actually act on to some degree. In those days. Nowadays, they are almost, I don't understand. It's like they're hysterically wrong on every single controversy to the dumbest possible degree. And you don't see them letting up. And I don't know. I think their minds were broken mimetically as a collective herd mind. And they're just kind of frazzled in a state of despair of clinging on to reality through the TV and the newspaper, because they still see the prestige, or what was universally seen as prestige, in outlets like NBC and the New York Times. And they think, if I just cling to that old veneer of prestige, it will keep me through this time of chaos. If I just hold on to that because it feels slick, it's powerful, it's cool. The New York Times is still something that, by the way, conservatives still give prestige to these institutions as well, right? Trump just went on NBC. Conservatives still put the most nastiest conservative will say the New York Times bestseller, right? They always got to put that on the title of their copy. If they get that, they all want approval from these institutions. So their prestige that they have, the neoliberal mind clings to that on such a fundamentalist degree and saying, here I stand and I will stand nowhere else. If this prestige entity says there's not a drop of good that ever came out of Russia, that's what I'm taking to the bank. My mind can't handle nuance on this. And the same thing for the pandemic. If the New York Times and the CDC and NBC and all these things, if they say it's a random animal, then it's a random animal. If they say lockdown forever, then we lock down forever and a half. If they say put on the mask, we put it on, and we wait to them to tell us to take it off. If they say get a booster for the rest of your life, we do it. And now some of them are they're tapering off because those are fundamentalists, and they can't all, their numbers show that they're not getting the same buy-in, of course, as they used to. But there still is a slow recognition from that group culturally. They're still mimetically protecting their minds from the victims. They can't see the victims of the greatest medicine ever developed. They can't see it. They can't see the victims of the Ukraine war still. They can't see the victims of what's going on with this artificially induced mass migration, overloading cities, destroying infrastructure, destroying, the ability to have civil services work and function because they're just being overloaded. They're just being funneled by billionaires to just absolutely, they're just watching this mass thing happen, and they're not able to see the victims that the TV and the newspapers exclude. And that's an interesting phenomenon, because I am one to say that the gospel knowledge is working in the world. And I point out, look how quickly in real time people woke up to the tyranny of the pandemic tyranny, authoritarianism, versus the Bolshevik Revolution. When the Bolshevik Revolution came, intellectuals thought it was the coolest thing, futuristic new ideology that had arrived on the scene, and everybody was kind of interested to see, in terms of mass consciousness, what's going to happen. Is this the new future space age ideology that will transform humanity into a perfect industrial factory machine of equal wealth or something? Everybody was kind of spellbound by the intelligentsia's assessment of that. Now, that stronghold in terms of suffocating the truth is not as powerful today, 100 years later, when the pandemic happened. Yes, the cool kids and the elitists are still pushing almost in unison and in complete 100% conformity the pandemic tyrannical nonsense. But half the country, if not more, and I would say the same, maybe more than half of the world's population, has to one degree or another said that thing was a little bit of a gimmick designed to have tyranny in place and to eliminate small businesses and individual community and sense making and trust and family bonds, and really just kind of take a vice grip, authoritarian style. A lot of people woke up to that in real time. It didn't take 10 years, I mean, look, the way 9/11 was exploited, that took years for people to wake up to realize, wait a second, this has been used as an opportunity to throw in surveillance and torture and corporate allies in government taking over wealth and Halliburton and all this stuff. It took years. It was several years before the event happened. And then the wars took years to unfold too. But still, there was some speed to it, but it wasn't as fast as how the pandemic tyranny has been undermined in real time. So I do think in general that the population will continue to be a little bit more savvy in looking for the hidden victims of the next mimetic narrative, right? But I'm still concerned about the stubborn fundamentalist contingent of the population that wants to go along with prestige from past institutions.
Yeah, those I share your concern as well. And I don't know, it's very hard to figure that out because there's so many people who really, are just hesitant, or just not even hesitant, just like you said, they're bought into this control narrative, establishment narrative. And you will find many of these people even debating others online as to why their narrative is like unquestionable. You can't even question the narrative. And the very fact that you are questioning that narrative automatically makes you a person who is threatening violence, quote unquote. A lot of these people say, it's like a very old uh mantra that they go by, which is silence is violence, or something like that. Or uh being not racist isn't good enough, you have to be actively anti-racist, or stuff like that. So it really is like doubling down on their ideology, right? And it's like, it's like what the gospel has revealed anthropologically is that it's like people are fundamentally religious to their being, to their core.
That's why, by the way, that Jesus did his resurrection in private. Only those who were in his church were allowed to see some evidence of that, right? Because it's almost as if Jesus understood that if he did his resurrection as a big spectacle for the crowd to all observe, that they would turn it into some kind of new cultic religion, different, which makes you wonder what happened to the church. But but it's interesting, isn't it not, that his two things that he does are most public in terms of his completion of his project to expose humanity to its matrix of lies that it calls religion and culture. One, the crucifixion is public. Number two, the destruction of the temple. He predicts, that's what he uses as a prophet to say, look, you can trust what I'm saying. A prophet always made a prediction that was time sensitive, right? Like in a near future, you're going to see this happen. This will let you know that what I've been saying and all of it has had authority. And he kept saying the temple will be destroyed, the temple will be destroyed. And that's what happens in 70 AD. That's a public event that vindicates the claims that Jesus was making on a whole another bunch of matters. The resurrection, though, he keeps it concealed to just a few. Nobody actually sees the resurrection, but only a few people see the aftermath of the resurrection. Because of the cultic nature of human beings, they would have turned it into a Hulkamania thing or something. You know what I mean? They would have turned it into a Hercules cult. They would have. And I mean, that's what they're still trying to do that 2,000 years later. As an anthropological way of looking at it, they're still trying to take the resurrection part and to use that as a kind of spiritual kind of trump card to kind of overlay on top of society to say, you know, this is someone that we should emulate and use violence to protect because he's got all the power. Still missing out on the point. Just like Jesus warned Peter, remember when he was washing Peter's feet and Peter's like, no, you don't need to do that to me. And he's like, no, come on. You don't understand. And he's like, okay, well, wash everything about me. So he tries to turn it into a ritual bathing, a ritual washing, like a ritual cleansing bath. So he's missing the point again. He's trying to turn it into a ritual. Okay, this is what we're doing. We're trying to be pure now. And Jesus is like, no, you're still not getting it. I'm trying to show you that the way in which you'll handle society without the protections of sacrificial violence keeping you all along together, getting along, you're going to have to learn to be the kind of leader that can do the dirty work of washing the dirty, nasty feet off of your followers who are stupidly not getting it. And that gesture of humility will be the mimetic cycle that reciprocally bubbles up in the absence of the sacred to allow you guys to get along with one another. But Peter, of course, is trying to take it and reorient it back into, okay, so we were trying to do a purity. We're trying to get pure for a ritual purity bath because we got to show ourselves pure, like works righteousness to try to please the deity, right? And Jesus is just totally passing that away, you know?
Yeah. When there's another quote by Jesus that says, "The first shall be last, and the last shall be first." Right? When he talks about the parable of uh, the banquet, I believe, and then Jesus. There's also that. I believe he also said a similar thing when some of his disciples were arguing about who is going to sit at his right hand and so on. So yeah, I think it's in the same passage. I'm getting confused about the Bible actual verse and everything, but yeah, you can see that Jesus was alluding to that throughout his ministry, right? uh he
And you can see that
exemplified it himself.
they fulfill, the church has fulfilled that kind of prophetic misrecognition that the apostles are doing there. Who's going to sit at your right hand? Another way of saying it, who's going to have the keys to the kingdom? Jesus, which has absolutely eviscerated the church, having that kind of stupidity. Okay? It is stupid. Because that's the same thing Jesus is calling as stupid. The idea of saying, who's got the keys and who's got the keys to the car? Did mama give you the keys to the car to the BMW, or do I have the keys? I get to drive the BMW. That's the same way of saying, I get to sit at your right hand. And Jesus totally backhands the whole thing. And humanity looks at that and says, yes, I will follow God. Now, who's got the keys? They don't understand it, And you're supposed to pick a side and be like, well, yeah. He did rebuke them when they did that exact same gesture when he was alive, but that doesn't count for when we do it. When we do the gesture, we're just trying to create order and structure because we need order and structure. It's pretty insane, right? Pretty insane what humans will do when they can get away with it.
Yeah, it's almost
Who's
like
got the keys, for God's sake.
It's almost like humanity has a habit of undermining, the main message itself by, covering that message with all sorts of things. And that's a shame because the gospel is such a wonderful, such an amazing piece of revelatory literature. And there's so many things in there that, one of the things that we talk about is, how God deals with the violence that humanity perpetuates on the face of this earth. And the way that God deals with that violence is not from top down, but it's from bottom and all around, from bottom up, right? by bottom up, I mean, when Jesus, I mean, look at the way how Jesus comes into the world, right? He comes in a place that's used for sheltering farm animals, or that kind of place, and he's born into he's kept into dirt because there was no place to lay him. And he's born to uh I wouldn't say he was born to very wealthy businessman or something like that. Nor was he born into a a royal family, although he was a descendant in the royal lineage. But still, he chose, that was God choosing to be born into that place where majority of humanity is, and that's in the dirt, right? It's in poverty, it's in dirt, it's in like the place where no one wants to be in. And that's and as Jesus grows up, and as he starts his ministry, he starts his healing, and he's preaching and all of that. There is really no royal injunction or royal commandment or anything at all. It's basically this one man trying to persuade people to follow and join in the way, right? The way that was what the early Christians were known called their movement as, right?
Yeah.
So he was persuading people to join in this way, and there were plenty of people who did not follow him. That did not mean that Jesus seeked out their addresses at the in the darkness of night and hunted them down because they did not follow God's commandments. Because if anybody on earth has the authority to stamp out dissidents, that's God. And God himself did not do that. And yet we humans, lowly pitiful humans, are going around and subjugating our neighbors, canceling them on the internet, or putting them in prison or whatnot. We are such pitiful creatures, and yet we think so highly of ourselves that we think that we have the authority to do these things. But yet here was God, who did not do any of these things. And the primary example, which is what Paul said to the early church: I preach nothing but Christ crucified. He did not say, I preach the authority, the sword of God, or on any of these other stuff. He said Christ crucified. And Paul thought that was the primary, that was the priority. And of all Christian teachings is the image of Christ being crucified. Why is that such a significant, such a high important image? Is that Christ crucified tells us exactly how God is willing to save us. He isn't going to use a cross as a battering ram to punish our enemies. Rather than that, he is willing to part with his own life in order so that we may be saved, and be saved from our own destructions and all so on.
Heard someone say, they were saying that in their tradition, he gets upset when he comes out as the priest and he sees that his congregation is sitting, because in his tradition, if you're sitting, you're in a position of authority to then begin to teach. And, on one level, it makes, from an earthly, fleshly standpoint, it makes sense to make that kind of critique in a Christian framework. But then you think for one moment, the kind of upside down inverted kingdom, in a good way, inverting man's sense of power, is what Jesus does. In what universe does a man who intentionally shows up in a food trough, who intentionally hangs out with the unclean and the paralyzed, who intentionally is reclining at table with people who are considered to be dissidents and rebellion, or traitors to the people that are holy in his time? At what sense do you say, wait a second, what kingdom am I emulating here? If a position of power is to be given a crown, from a man who was given a thorn of crowns, and you're emulating the thorn of crowns with a golden crown, I'm sorry. I think that's ridiculous. Now, I understand mimetically from an anthropological angle, at the time that the churches are adapting these kind of things, they're trying to connect with cultures that are used to these kind of more brazen displays of power. But I don't think it's something that we should idolize. I think the moment we start to idolize these things and say, oh, this is proof of holiness, or this is proof of authority, we have missed the entire point. And you see that over and over and over again. You know, Jesus says, do not store up your treasures in heaven. And then we have a Vatican bank. And that Vatican bank has been the sore spot for that church being deeply corrupted. Yeah. Because when you start playing with money changers will beat your tail eventually and hold leverage over your church. Because money changers who are their entire point is to win in the game of banking. And when you have a fiat currency based system and your church is like, yeah, we're going to do that too. Well, if you play in that world, if you stored up your treasures on earth rather than in heaven, you're going to get leveraged by the things of the world. The powers who hate what the Lord of glory did when he esteemed not treasures and earthly powers. But they always, all these traditions, and it's not, I'm going to hit the Protestants do the same thing. They come out, the holiness, the Pentecostal thing, they come out with the Rolodex. I've seen I've seen Orthodox. Who was that Orthodox guy in Russia? The Metropolitan came out with Rolodex, and he had a Photoshop the Rolodex out of his hand, out of his wrist, because they didn't want to show that he was holding a Rolodex that he got. It's little attaboys like that. And they always justify it by saying, well, this is how we show respect to Jesus. It's like, at what gospel did you read that he said he wanted gold Rolodexes as his thing, so therefore anybody who stands in his place should get a Rolodex? What gospel did you read that said he wanted to have a giant, golden scepter on there, or a golden crown? What gospel is that? That's you retarding the gospel. You're retarding the gospel to hold on to those things as symbols of holiness. It's not a symbol of holiness to go back in time to the era of King David, when Jesus has replaced his crown with a crown of thorns and defeated it. It's not that we should walk around with a crown of thorns. It's that the crown of thorns reveals the truth of the crown of gold as humans have used it. The crown of thorns reveals that every crown of gold is actually just a ticking time bomb for the person wearing it to be human sacrificed eventually down the road too. So we're past that from a mimetic standpoint, but yet we're not. Because 2,000 years later, people, because they're scared of drag queens, they're clinging to golden crowns again. And you're like, okay, well, I'm not saying tear it down, but I'm just saying, like, have some intelligence and some like adult maturity as a Christian, emulating someone who says, take up your cross. He doesn't say take up your scepter, take up your talisman, take up your, Vatican bank and follow me. He doesn't say that. If they had engineers, imagine with that bank, what they could do if they actually said, instead of us getting leveraged by CCP China and stuff like that, we're going to go ahead and create engineers 24/7 to create energy for the people, and we're going to put it in the public domain. The Roman Catholic Church could fund everything. They could literally, like they used to do with Galileo and stuff like that, they could literally come around and say, we're going to fund the greatest public works projects for the most imaginative, amazing Teslas of our time. They could fund all of this. They could shut this stuff down tomorrow. The Roman Catholic Church has the money to, and the American churches do too. But I'm just saying, let's talk about the biggest dog on the block. They have the money that they should be able to fund every human being in America and the world over to know about the truth of seed oils, toxic things. They should have pamphlets in every Catholic mess hall where they have their luncheons. They should have little pamphlets that teach about seed oils. They have the money. They can do it. They want to talk. See, the problem with the Catholic Church isn't that they got hijacked by radical liberation people. The liberation people that took over the church are fake liberation people. They're making alliances with corrupt authoritarian dictators that are making peace with the devil. They're not going in there and saying, let's have cold fusion. Hello, I'm Papa. I want to have cold fusion. I'm setting aside $5 billion fund for the craziest, whimsical, insane engineers who will produce excess heat and have it replicable by all the best scientists in the world. They could do that, but they don't want to because they got a bank that's got leverage with oil and big green, fake green, and all the other crap that they're involved with. So that's what happens when you pursue earthly power. You get that kind of stupid corruption. And that's the truth.
Yeah, that's a lot to take in. And uh I'm just thinking, like,
Where's the
I mean,
keys to my anti-gravity device, Vatican Bank? You could have had it
oh
all, but
boy.
you didn't do anything. You didn't do anything. What are you doing? You're putting your money on the money market right now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is like, again, like the age-old problem of institutionalized religion, right? And that's really, why a lot of the, I mean, I wouldn't say that's the entirety of it, but one of the reasons why a lot of people tuned out of religion as a whole, in general, is because they have a hard time, and as rightfully as they should have a hard time of reconciling these politics that you have mentioned with the actual message and the message of Christ. And and it's also not just that people are tuning out of religion. It's also like, as we talked about, is that people are, because they are fundamentally religious, and the gospel technology, as we've briefly talked about, and all of these things, they merge into into this phenomena that's called wokeism or whatever. So Girard famously, not, I wouldn't say famously, but it's really a great observation that he made, is that this radical liberalism, which is this radical leftism or whatever you want to call it, they are haunted by victims, and their message is primarily, in the guise of victim defending and so on, is because the church itself has, conceded that aspect, of his mission, and it's like it chose to do away with that mission, that the church was that the church had inherited from Jesus. Jesus said that, visit the, as you mentioned before, visit the ones who are in prison, visit the ones who are sick, heal the sick, and the separation of the goats and the entire thing. That was the Jesus's commandment for Christians to take on the ones, of defending the marginalized, and alleviating suffering. And what the churches, and not just the Catholic Church, but all churches in general have done, is that they said, okay, we're not going to do this, we're going to create a bank, or whatever, and then we're going to give these holy, practices over to the secular, statist people. And when you do that, then you are people are going to ask, what happened to you? Like, why aren't you doing these things? Why are you preoccupied with you know w- whether people are standing or sitting or not? Why is that your primary preoccupation? Why is that your primary concern, instead of being
Well,
concerned about the suffering of the world?
well,
So
let me be fair, and I know you would agree with this. I'm not saying that's their primary concern, but when you have to make a point of it, and your means and your job is to practice the things that are holy, are you really trying to imitate Jesus, or are you hedging your bets by imitating some of the worldly concerns of your institution that have accumulated alongside the love of Jesus that you're trying to emulate? And when you do that, does it not reveal the truth as to why we're in the situation we're in? The fact of the matter is, we don't need millions of dollars to create energy too cheap to meter. We need courage. We need people willing to suffer martyrdom to do it.
Yes,
That's the
that's
bottom
true.
line. It's not about the dollar amount. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they got what, $200 billion? They got plenty of money they could help and they could
Wow.
invest in this.
Mhm.
So I don't want to pick on I didn't just get a memo from a Jesuit ninja either. I'm just saying, I'm not trying to pick on one group or another.
Jesuit ninja. Oh my goodness.
What I'm trying to say is that, there's a lot of opportunity that's right under our noses, but everybody's still stuck on their little fiefdom. And it's the same thing for these mega churches, the mega churches, and they dress with their little hipster jeans that are torn, they're ripped, pre-ripped, and the pastor walks out and he says, "Aren't you so glad to go to a church where we don't care about how you're dressed?" It's like, yeah, you're wearing a
Yeah, that's like
$700. Yeah.
that's like dogmatizing the opposite, right? Like so that's a very as we like
Yeah.
criticize the church's practices on all of that, there's also a separate
But
opposite
that's
extreme.
victimist wealth showcasing, right? So that the old one, you wear, a golden crown. In the new one, you
Right.
wear ripped clothes to pretend to be poor, but it actually costs you $700 for that designer jeans. And the kid in the back that came who says, "Aren't you glad?" He's hearing a message from the pastor. "Aren't you glad you don't go to a church where everybody's so dressed up and they think they're so better than you?" And he's looking at his clothes and he's thinking, "Those are not nearly as cool as the ones I see in the worship band and the pastor. So I've got some places to catch up to." So now he's mimicking a role model of wealth, but it's a victimist wealth brand rather than a classical wealth brand, right? Like Rolex or a golden crown.
Yeah, like say like that pastor or preacher or whatever saying, "Oh, see that guy, that other dude is wearing a Rolex, but I wear a Casio or something."
And I want to
So
I
it's
want to say, yeah, and I want to say something else too. I think I'm not one of those people that says don't build beautiful cathedrals. That's not me either. I'm not saying that. So that's what I'm trying to break through the dialectic right here, because the dialectic usually says if someone is criticizing a big institution church for not using its money in a creative way that's helping people, they always are the type of person that says you should be meeting in a barn, not a beautiful cathedral. I'm not saying that either. I think we should have beautiful works of architecture that do inspire awe and beauty and symmetry and all the beautiful things that art can do for people to ground a humanity towards something bigger than themselves. Absolutely. I have no problem with that. But again, there's room for that and Teslas and Galileos and folks doing great things that churches are funding, or
well, I
churches
was
are speaking truth to, because
yeah.
it takes if the church is the place of Jesus like martyrs and they're not willing to be martyred for talking about how to have energy outside of the grid, then they're not the place of Christ. They're just not. And no wonder they're not effective at doing anything really.
Right, and this is one very key important thing that you brought up, is that when people talk about, okay, why isn't the church doing helping to alleviate the sufferings of humanity, the image that comes into a lot of people's minds is something like a Mother Teresa or something, right? Where okay, you're building hospitals, or we're building charitable education institutions and all of that, which is fine, which has been done a lot throughout history. But I think uh, like you said, the churches, the leaders in the churches have to also take a bold, courageous leap into supporting people like a Tesla or like a Galileo, or like somebody who can not only just accumulate a lot of sick people into one building and just giving them the same crappy old medicine that's being put out by big pharma, but they will be able to give people radicalized medicine, cheap generic drugs that you talked about, and they will be able to alleviate pain through all kinds of different technologies. So that's one thing that the churches may have been doing during the Renaissance or like the Middle Ages, even in terms of scholastics and all of that. But it's something that it really doesn't want to even wet its finger into, because people, I mean, if you go into the churches, especially the institutionalized churches, there is hardly any discussion. I mean, not hardly. I mean, I haven't even seen anything like a discussion about, okay, we're having, this and this. What do they call it? Uh, like some literature book discussion thing or whatever, but they don't do anything that's like, okay, let's have a discussion, let's have a round table on technology and its relation to how Jesus will save the world. So there's hardly any discussion like that at all. Christians don't want to discuss, I mean, especially the Christian leaders, the ones who are in the position of authority. I'm not even talking about the average person who just goes there and makes the sign of the cross and like that, but I'm talking about the ones who are the bishops, the big you know leaders, the authorities, the pastors, all of that. They don't even talk about that. And the moment you bring up a question like that, if you go up to someone like that and ask, okay, how are we planning to use technology in the church's mission to save the world? They will say, oh, I'm not a scientist. You have to go to someone like a Neil deGrasse Tyson for that. And someone like a Neil deGrasse Tyson is saying, that's all hocus pocus. Don't believe in the fairy tale of the Bible. Come to me, I'll show you how science actually works. And actually how it works is, Newtonian physics, Albert Einstein, the whole calculation, all of that thing, which is, just makes your mind even more confused. And that's it. Just follow the basic textbook. And that's how stagnation is created. So how stagnation is created, you can see, is starting from from the religious institutions, the churches. If they have the power to break this stagnation by saying, okay, now not only are we going to reclaim marriage, but we are also going to reclaim science, because we are the people, our Lord and Savior gave birth to this scientific revolution that you are all are claiming to worship. We are the one who gave rise to the skeptic, the ones who are skeptical about established
And
narratives.
these the people who are critics of Christianity say, well, the Romans and the Greeks had all kinds of scientific marvels. They had their arches and everything, but the science that they were doing was not mediated by some kind of universal desire to to tame nature for the subservience of the human of the person good of the personal good, to protect the human person. It was not designed towards the least of these. It was not designed towards the elevation of the rich and the poor alike, with cures for every disease commonly available to the public. That's the Christian insight that spurred the great things we have, like hospitals. The Romans and the Greeks, the innovations that they would do were kept for the aristocrats. It was for the aristocrats. They're the ones that were initiated in the secret guilds. They were the ones that lived and died with the secrets and didn't pass it down to the public so that the other people could take it and add to it. Now, I don't believe in democratizing everything, but the point is, it's something better than democracy. It's that the human person should orient what we're doing to advance and tame nature, to cultivate it for the glory of God, to elevate the human person in the way that God wants the human person to be elevated from the despair of reciprocal violence and might makes right. And so, the Roman technology tended to evolve around the needs of the aristocracy and empire, right? Murder, blood. How can we more effectively kill each other? Here's a catapult. Here's a gun. Here's all these
Right.
different inventions. Whereas the Christian impulse opens up, well, this person has nothing. They can't even afford to give us a chicken, but they have a wound, and we can stop this infection for the glory of God. The human person is sanctified in this moment, or, is brought into a state of grace and mercy for the glory of God, right? That's the least of these imperative that Christianity brings. And that's what animates, like you also mentioned, the scientific revolution being born with the church, because the church was not afraid of nature the way the pagans were. They didn't want to pagans didn't want to chop a tree down because they're afraid it would invite ancestor curses or something,
Or release sacred waters on something like
we
that,
saw
right?
that recently pop up again, the stupidity of that and the evil of that, really.
Yeah, and on top of the things that you mentioned, which are very credible, I would also like to mention that we've throughout, like, how old is the world exactly? Like, if you speak to someone who's not a creationist would say something like 5,000 or 6,000. But if you speak to someone who's not a creationist, it would vary between million to billion or whatever, right? So Christianity, the world under Christianity has a 2,000-year window, right? So see the progress, technological progress in those 2,000 years as compared to the technological progress over billions of millions of years, right? Yeah, I mean, how much time did humans take for them to just develop a wheel, right? It took over centuries, right? It took over thousands of years. A lot of the parts of the world, uh, uh when people from Western civilizations, or somewhere from advanced parts of the culture, societies came to primitive cultures, they did not even have certain technologies like the wheel, or those some things like that. There's basic technologies like the water well or something like that. But just see the progress of technological innovation in the 2000 years after Jesus Christ died and resurrected. You'll see just bursting out. And no, it did not just happen in the Renaissance. People did not drop everything in a very short window, and like, just decide that they were going to just dump Christianity or religious, and they suddenly decided to become materialistic atheist or something like that. History does not work like that. Cultural influence does not happen like that. It happens slowly over a gradual period of time, and there has to be a certain environment already prepared for that said renaissance to take place. So if say like someone like Galileo went over to some place like the Inca or the Aztec Empire and said that the world is sphere round or whatever, like, if he said something like that, would he had the same impact on that culture as as he had on in Western Europe at that time? I don't think so. I think a society has to be prepared to receive your Neil deGrasse Tysons, or the Bill Nye, or whatever your chosen genius is nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, I know the Vatican does fund science, by the way, but they do that thing like you talking about, where they basically just hold court for Neil deGrasse Tyson types that are just going to conventionally push out, like loyal foot soldiers, the scientific or scientism groupthink of the religious fashions of their time. They're not going to poke holes and say, I really want to pursue this anomalous data to see where it goes. I don't care if the standard model is conflicted with this, or I really want to try room temperature nuclear energy, because I don't care if it's just going to disrupt government billions of dollars in subsidies going to the big dogs in my field. I don't care. I want to know the truth. Or I really don't care what Dr. Fauci and the NIH, which has a monopoly kingdom over medicine funding and research. I don't care what they say. I don't care if it cuts me off. I'm going to pursue this doggedly, this generic drug for this disease, or to prevent or cure this other disease. I don't care what the FDA's interests are in being owned by these these oligarchic cutout groups like Pfizer and so forth. That they didn't even develop this product, by the way. It was developed by the Pentagon. It was developed by military. They handed it to their corporate cutouts in the public market to make it look like it had the veneer of like legitimate market-based science, but it was just a government thing. Anyways, it was military funding. So that's what you get when you have military funded medicine. You get something that's as garbage as the thing we've had. But that's what you get. But they don't want to dissent against there, and we all want to have a day where we can see someone like a Pope Francis go and visit the prisoners in the CCP China. Can he do that? Jesus says you will know who is the sheep and who are the goats by who will visit those in prison. It's easy for Pope Francis, I don't even know if he's done this, but if he did, to visit a prisoner in Italy, in the self-flagellating West. Of course he can visit the underdogs of Italy, but can he visit the underdogs of CCP China? Can he do that? Can he give them a cup of water?
Right.
Can he do that? Because if he can't, then he's leveraged by the powers. And we need to rethink what a church looks like if its system is designed to be so easily corruptible because of its addiction to might makes right forms of power, that it gets enslaved to its own passions, its own desires for earthly power. I mean, that's the whole thing that was inverted. And we shouldn't be trying to retard that progress by clinging to means that the church used to help in previous times pagans to better understand what they were getting at. They were means. All the things that you see today that look of grandeur and might and majesty in the church were tools. Those were seeker-sensitive tools that were developed to help the pagan mind understand what they were getting at. They were the ripped jeans and the fog machines of their time 1,000 years ago or 1,500 years ago, and yet they don't want to admit that. Because to admit that means that, wait a second, it had a utility to it, that it wasn't dropped down from on high, right? That's the whole reason why everybody's obsessed with who's got the keys to the kingdom, because what they really want is they want to have power to say that whatever I do has come down from on high, right? They want to just be able to claim that. And that's just, you will know them by the fruits that they bear. And that's the bottom line. If the fruits are bearing a bunch of nonsense in the form of what we see today, then we know that the fruit is rotten, and therefore the roots are rotten.
Right. And there's also one thing, like, I mean, if you're one of those guys, and I'm speaking to the audience here, like, if you're one of those guys who's saying, okay, like, you said, Christians should visit the ones who are in prison, or the ones who are the ones who are sick. Then I mean, you necessarily don't have to wait on Pope John Paul or whoever the one is right now, Pope Francis to visit the prisoners. You can also go in and do it yourself, right? And I mean, just looking at your show, David, you've had plenty of people who have been locked away for unjust crimes, and you gave them a voice on your platform. I would really like the same, I would like people like, a Matt Walsh or a Candace Owens, or, these Crowder and all of these big conservative voices, in the country right now. I would really like some of them to give voices, because, when Biden was running his campaign, and I don't mean to get political, but I'm just trying to, make a point here, that when Biden was campaigning on the grounds that he was going to be a good president for the minorities, the Black people, and so on, a lot of these conservatives had no problem saying that, oh no, don't you, did you forget about Biden's crime bill and all of that? I think, David, you were probably the only one who had the flesh and bones evidence from that, from the horrific causes of the crime bill, and a lot of people, a lot of the conservatives, they were just, happy enough to just sit back and talk about it, just mention it in passing, just to make a point. But how much more effective they would be if they had the victims of this barbaric prison system that's basically all over the world right
but
now.
They're so caught up in the Medic rivalry with the left, because the left and the Soros DAs have been releasing violent prisoners, and they've been releasing, in San Francisco and other cities, you can basically steal up to $950 and they won't prosecute you. So you see these videos of people just going in and just ransacking the stores. But wait a second, just to say that's what they're caught up in, the shiny new toy of mimetic rivalry. So they can't, it feels like pouring cold water in the midst of their fight, right? You pouring cold water on them to get them to say, well, yeah, actually, maybe we need to rethink some of these incarceration practices for victimless and nonviolent choices. They feel like that's akin to basically saying, you need to be a little softer on crime in general, which means, therefore, you're directionally in the same boat as their mimetic rivals in the leftist Soros camp, who are allowing violent crimes to go unpunished, right? And so they can't. That's the trap of the binary dialectic of mimetic rivalry, is that you don't have space for the truth, right? Because the truth pours cold water on your passions. It complicates things, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess that is true. And
That's why they're not on board with that. I'm just saying that's why.
so no, you're correct. You're correct. And that's why, like we were talking about the church and how it has, abdicated its responsibility of, technological progress and all.
Yeah.
So and so. I mean, if you talk about, I don't mean to go on a tangent here, but if you talk about technological progress to a lot of these traditionalist types, a lot of them hold technological progress. For them, it has a negative connotation to it rather than something that's like, a positive, or even something that's just a phenomenon of nature. So they just look at it like, oh no, we don't need technological progress. We need the world as it is. So it makes me wonder how many people who are considered dissidents today, are like anti-establishment, are really like just want the world to stay as it is, rather than, like are they looking for a world that's stuck in the 90s or something, or in the 80s? So it's really
They're
like,
jealous, they're envious of their liberal betters who have the power, and they want their power. That's it.
yeah, yeah.
It's not that
And
complicated. They're mimetically jealous of the liberal betters. That's what they talk about. It's very fashionable in the conservative new right circles to talk about how liberalism has failed and they need to go back and replace something more fundamental that's not again, and all this boils down to is they think they're smarter and they wish that they could be seen as the elitists and the tastemakers, and they don't really want to trim any of the power and the voracious violence of the state because they just want to have what their liberal rivals have, and they think they can run it better, and they don't want to fundamentally rethink what it means to repent of empire. They don't have time for that.
well, not just the empire, right? I mean, everything, the way we do economics, for example. uh like when Christians, a lot of Christians, and I'm not just talking about the leaders right now, I mean a lot of believers, when they say that Jesus was the most awesome man in history, what do they mean exactly? Because I think Jesus had, shows us a whole new way of doing economics as well. Like, so for a lot of people, Jesus came here in this world, and just so that we can die and go to heaven, right? But how radical Jesus is that he changes how we do science, how we do economics, how we do medicine, how we do, like you mentioned, politics. And he changes the whole paradigm of how we do everything. So a lot of people are comfortable to just, sit back and say, okay, Jesus did not really have anything to say about economics. He's basically a guru figure, like a Buddha, like a Gautam Buddha or someone, like Christians are offended when someone like a new age person comes to them and say, oh, I like Jesus. He was a great person like Gautam Buddha or Muhammad, or or Krishna or a Vishnu and like that. But Christians get offended at that time, but inwardly Christian, a lot of Christians do believe like that new age person, because they don't really think that Jesus had anything to say about economics and science and that stuff that we're talking about on on here right now. They don't think Jesus has any relevance to those things at all, like the prison system, like we touched upon right now. They think that Jesus had nothing to say about the prison system. When he says, go and visit the person who is in prison, do you realize what he's saying there? He's showing some empathy for the person who might have committed some horrendous acts in society. So this is not just, pacifism we're talking about here. This is like radical forgiveness. Like, this is crazy. This is I think C.S. Lewis was right. He was either a Lord or he was the trilemma that he calls it, like, right? Or he's a lunatic to be locked away from society forever because that dude is crazy. Yeah, So people don't realize that level of significance that Jesus has.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to just see the disconnect there in real time. But I think that in all these mistakes, there's always a Aikido move that God is going to orchestrate through our failures to open up new paths of having the knowledge of God permeate our culture and our minds. So we should be excited and delighted to see how our failures that we'll continually do will, unfortunately, we don't always have to do failures, but that tends to be where we lean, especially as groups, that our failures may collectively bubble up into greater and greater opportunities for mercy and grace to abound, and to knowledge, and for knowledge to explode in creative new ways that only Jesus's genius can pull off. So what that means is that, like, for example, they're flooding these, millions of immigrants and refugees, and I have a feeling that that's going to be a trap, that Jesus is going to Aikido flip a lot of those folks into being more anti-globalist than the globalists can possibly imagine. There's something about it. I understand, the dumb right-wing reactionary take is to look at things on a conventional plane and say, well, statistically, these refugees that they're mass importing are going like 90% Democrat, and the Democrat is a nihilist party bent on war and globalism and, mass mail-in ballots and all this insanity. So if they're going for that, they're part of the problem, and it's the sinking of the American, way of life as we know it. That is a very kind of realistic way to look at it. But I don't think that accounts for the Aikido God factor of how God can use, right, the cynical power plays of the wicked to beat the wicked. So just watch and see. There's going to be a play here that I think is going to be available for us to lean into, right? And it doesn't mean things are perfect, and it doesn't mean, therefore, we should just allow millions and millions to that's just stupid. If you have a city, right, that's set up for 100,000 people, and 300,000 people show up in the next year who don't know anything about your culture and don't know anything about, like, the decorum and the high trust society of, being able to get a gallon of raw milk from the local farmer and put the money in the little jar and don't take it. Like, they don't have that as a practice framework built into their country they're coming from. And you flood 300,000 of folks directionally in that direction into a city that's built infrastructure for 100,000 people, and you do that in a year, it's going to create disruption. Now, the liberal mind says we need to make space, right? And there's a lot of Christian passages they can pull to, right? But at the end of the day, it's easy to say make space when you're using the violence of the state to make your neighbor pay for it by force through taxation and, disruption of the services that they've paid into for a 300,000 surge of people overnight. But I still think that God is going to use this globalist effort to try to smother out the last elements of freedom and liberty in the American Republic as a way to explode more liberty, more beauty, more Christian concern for, flourishing. And I'm not sure exactly how it's going to play out right offhand, but I do think that I would not be surprised if this isn't a trap that Jesus is setting for the globalists. I mean,
do you think that
it always is, man? I mean, every crucifixion, it's always a trap. Okay, let's put it that way. So if you're looking at America and you're looking at how the roads used to be paved, and things used to seem to be a little bit more together and like friendly, and everybody was kind of working towards individual respect rather than collective interest. Like, here we are, we're coming together, and it's our nation here, and we hate you, or the natives. Like, that whole thing can't work. But don't put it past God and Jesus to always use what you think to be the crucifixion moment to be the point for resurrection. So that's all I can say for that.
Yeah, and another thing I wanted to ask you this. It's probably a very deep question, so I don't mean to put you on the spot or anything. But do you think there's a possibility that the nation state concept as a whole might, the vanishing of that concept as a whole might be part of God's plan to bring in the kingdom of heaven on
Sure.
earth?
Yeah. Yes.
So how would that gel with the traditionalist conservative types? Would they be pleased by hearing that? Or would they say, oh no,
I don't know.
rather than, rather than God's plan coming to fruition, we would rather hold on to something that was like a transitionary phase or something like that? Because the nation state concept, people don't get this, is the nation state concept is a pretty new concept, right? Like, prior to that they had kingdoms and civilizations, right? India, like for example, India was not one nation state prior to the British. India was a lot of kingdoms competing against one another, and the same thing is probably true of the Native Americans, right? Or a lot of these civilizations that existed before you know uh, the colonizers came and whatnot. So uh, I'm just wondering, just thinking out loud, whether how would people groups look uh when faced with the kingdom of God at hand. How would they really look like? Would they resemble government ruled bureaucracy, the same bureaucrat system of governments that is in existence today, or would it look something different at all?
Well, you're going to have to get along with every tribe and tongue in heaven. I mean, that's going to be very difficult for a hard-edged nationalist who idolizes the nation state or their ethnicity as a end all be all. Okay. At the same time, there's an
Right,
indication
like
in Revelation.
Christian.
There's an indication
Yeah.
in Revelation that the kings at the end of the world are maintaining their nations as they come to bow before the throne at the new heavens and new earth.
So
So
is this the trap that Jesus has set for the globalists? Is Jesus using the globalists in a certain sense? Because
yes,
when you speak about I'm just trying to make it more
oh,
obvious for
right. That's what I'm saying.
about
Yeah,
for.
yeah. This is a trap. This is a trick.
So Jesus would say, I'll keep the globalism, but I'll get rid of those people, get rid of you, the Hillary Clintons, the Joe Soros, and the people who want to run this thing. Like, okay, you've ushered in the concept, but I'm going to get rid of your coercive, violent based system that you've created, and as well as I'm going to get rid of the people who are running that system too. So yeah, I could see that happening. I mean, I'm just wondering how the Christian nationalists are going to cope with that, because this is something that people need to get into their heads. As far as I'm concerned, is a lot of these new emerging movements that like to call themselves nationalists and whatnot. Again, they need to wake up and see what is happening, and once they do, I think they will not be as hopeless as they are currently right now.
Yeah, that's kind of the picture that I'm seeing here. And I don't know of anybody that's talking like this in the world of media that I'm aware of, but I see this as a trap, as a it's like what they talk about with the early discussions about Jesus's atonement on the cross is the one of Christ is the bait, right, to capture the fish, right, and that the fish is then defeated by the hook, right? The hook that's in there that dismantles the Satan being the accuser system itself. So if the accuser system itself is dressing up as a victim in order to maintain its power, at some point that is going to sow the demise of that authoritarian power and open up an opportunity for, like you said, getting rid of globalism and nationalism. Right now, nationalism and globalism are like a false dialectic of fighting over, should we double down on our nation identity as our means of unity, or should we, go to this globalist, oligarchic mediated, sense of culture that's trying to be foisted upon us as a kind of, reciprocal rival to the nationalist spirit. I think the future is going to look more like localism with a universal vision, a local universal patchwork of communities being able to get along together through technologies that kind of gear us towards nonviolent uses of our time rather than violent use of our time.
Yeah, amen.
I appreciate your time, Surit, and thank you again for joining me. You can always email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. That's hello@aneighborschoice.com. Thanks again for joining us.